Hi, everybody, and welcome to an awesome virtual Canada Day celebration. I'm Nabil Rahman, the mild-mannered community development specialist, and really happy to be joined by the ever wonderful, the genius, Julian Kingston from the Oakville Museum. So, Julian, what are you doing for Canada Day, and why are you here at Queen Elizabeth Park Community and Cultural Center?
Well, thanks so much for the wonderful introduction, Nabil. I really don't know about genius, but I'm here at Queen Elizabeth Park Community and Cultural Center because this is actually where the museum holds its collections for the most part. We have these wonderful collection spaces that were partially funded by the Department of Canadian Heritage. We have these fancy movable compact storage shelves. And we can get a lot of material in here, and we can also keep them in safer conditions than we could under like in the museum buildings, because the museum buildings are quite old, and here is a much more modern building. We can have modern temperature and humidity controls, and it's just better for the objects. And so what a lot of people don't realize, if you go and come and visit us as a museum at one of our locations or at the main site at Arkless Estate on Navy Street, you see just a fraction of our objects out. The museum has something like 18,000 objects in its collections. So today I thought we'd talk a little bit about the history of Oakville, how the history of Oakville kind of parallels the history of the province of Ontario and the development of Canada, and just the idea around centennials and celebrations and things like that. But before I get into all of that, I just wanted to reference that, Oakville sits on the treaty lands of Treaties 14 and 22. This was the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, and where we are, obviously talking about Canada Day and celebrating that. It is also a history of colonialism, and for our Indigenous partners and neighbors, it's not necessarily a day of celebration from them, from their perspective. And I think we need to recognize that there are lots of perspectives on histories, lots of ways to tell those stories. And certainly at the museum, we look forward to working with our Indigenous partners to do a better job of representing, helping to amplify their voices and represent their stories. There is a really great piece here at QEP, if you ever get a chance to see it, done by Brenda Collins. It's a representation of the medicine wheel. And I think there's a great connection in that one of Brenda Collins's ancestors was actually a signatory to the Treaty of Niagara in 1764, which is like a foundational treaty document, and really laid the base for many years of alliance between the British Crown and the Indigenous peoples of Canada. And that's a long history I won't necessarily get into, but also great, really interesting parallel in that her ancestor was fought in the war on the side of the British in the War of 1812, and William Chisholm, who we often refer to as the founder of Oakville, was a young ensign in those same battles. So it's entirely possible that they fought alongside each other. But I don't want to get into too much detail about military history and all that kind of things, because I think it's kind of more interesting to sort of skip along and jump around and just see what we can find. Now, here you can see some collection shelving behind me here. We really like to be able to talk to the people where, if we're taking an object into the collection, or if we have the objects in the collection, we really like to talk to the communities from which those objects came. So we're really trying to get the original voice and get back to the original stories of those objects if we can. And that's really important to us. For the museum's mandate, it's really to collect the stories of Oakville. And so for us, the story that goes with the object is often as important or even more important than the object itself. But just to give you an idea of some of the things we have, I'm going to flip my camera around, excuse my finger. And I thought, just on that idea of centennial, I can actually pull out an object from 1967. Wow. Which of course was the year that Canada celebrated its first 100 years. And so here's an object. Nabil, what does that look like to you?
I think that's a cup or a glass from which you drink milk, if I'm not mistaken. That's what I've traditionally used.
I think milk, ginger ale, whatever you want to put in this fancy cup. Like it's gold rim, it's very fancy. Yeah. People that were around in 1967 will recognize that logo, or you've probably seen it since. I was around in 1967, but after this.
Hmm.
I showed up in July, but not till the 24th. So
Right.
I think it's an excellent year. July is also a really good month in 1967, but I don't have any personal experience from drinking from a cup like this.
Right.
Another fun fact is we actually have two glass objects from the centennial, and one of them is actually currently on display at a satellite location. And when we do that, very simply, we often just leave a note in the drawer where that object lives. So if you look at this, you can see that the beer stein that we
Mhm.
have from 1967 is actually currently on display in our heritage display up at 16 Mile Sports Complex.
I wonder, Julian, for this the glass that we see in front of us, how much do you think was that like mass produced, or was that just something that was a souvenir, or was that given out to residents, or would you know how that came to produce
Oh,
it?
I've seen quite a few of these. So they did. I mean, glassware is a little bit fragile, but it is, if you don't drop it, it's really durable, right? So as long as you
Hmm.
take care of it, it lasts a super long time. In fact, in museums, we have like different kind of protocols for handling different objects, right? So if the material is sensitive, you'll see that I put a glove on before I touch it. But with
Right.
glass, it's actually safer just to use your hands because you get a better grip, and you don't want to drop your glass objects,
Totally.
and glass is quite cleanable.
Hmm.
But to answer your question, these were mass produced as souvenirs and people bought them by the bucketful, right? So they were
Right.
basically, I mean, I'm sure you could give them out, but I mean, it was the kind of thing that, I don't know specifically, but I do know about this particular object, but it was the kind of thing where like you'd go fill up at gas and they would give you a set of glasses, that sort of thing.
Ah,
So
I
you
see.
had them,
Nice.
they were given away, they were promotional objects. It was really a mix of all of that. If anybody knows exactly how that particular glass was distributed, I'd love to know. You could send me an email. That'd be perfect. Julian.kingston@oakville.ca.
Perfect. You know what's interesting, Julian? We might be making history here ourselves, right? We have our Canada Day rocks that I know the museum has collected a few of the rocks, the messages you see people as they're walking on their daily walks, positive messages as a result of obviously being in physical distancing. Who knows? Maybe 100 years from today, someone's going to be doing a Canada Day celebration and talking about the rocks that residents in Oakville painted, right? So
So
history
yeah,
is.
Nabil, I couldn't agree more. I think this is, if I think of any kind of moment in time through my own lifetime, this is easily identifiable as kind of the most historic period, right?
Right.
And not only starting out from sort of the pandemic and quarantine and moving into the massive upheaval around Black Lives Matter and just like a refocus on civil rights and human rights.
Hmm.
I think that's all like it's really from a museum point of view and kind of a capturing stories point of view, it's really we're trying to do what we can, given the resources we have, to try to collect some of those stories as we go along. That's a really important part of our function. We do have a call out. It's actually on our Facebook page, still up. You mentioned, the painted rocks, for example, which we've got great examples from in terms of people who've submitted those around through our COVID-19 call out.
Hmm.
And I'd like to extend that call out too around people who've been participated in and interested in looking at just the state of civil rights and human rights and the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that's also an important local story to capture as well.
Totally. And I think, we started with the acknowledgement that before Canada there was something there, right? And that was rich in culture, rich in tradition, rich in history. And when it comes to Oakville, right, you mentioned how, Chisholm participated in the War of 1812 alongside so many people. And we know that Oakville was also part of the Underground Railroad, right? It was one of the stops in the
Yeah,
Underground Railroad. So
that's true.
Oakville has a rich history. And I think the most important thing about that history is that it needs to be shared, it needs to be celebrated, and it needs to be acknowledged in the context of what it is that we're seeing today. Like you mentioned about Black Lives Matter, the Indigenous rights, and so Oakville is a part of that. So Julian, anything else that you want to share with us with regards to history, Oakville, And
Yeah, I think I'd like to jump forward to one of our other collections room in just a second, but just to tag on to what you said, I'm literally under my shirt, I'm wearing my museums are not neutral t-shirt. All right, because for many, many years, museums have said, oh yeah, we're not part of that conversation. We're outside of it. Our job is to be neutral and not to take a side or whatever. And the modern thinking in museums is that's not the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Museums absolutely have a position. And they're, as cultural institutions, they're looked to as voices of authority. And so really it's our job to share that authority and to not put ourselves forward as the experts on everything, but to really be able to work with communities and give them their voice and make sure their perspectives are heard. And Oakville Museum has been taking that approach for many, many years. Carolyn's actually really very good at it. Our curator is actually looked to across the country as a national a national expert on community-based exhibits. She'd be embarrassed if I said that, but it actually is true. And I think it's part of evolving museum practice, and it's something we're going to keep working on. We're going to jump over to our archives and see some actual paper evidence of Oakville's history. So that's going to be really cool.
Cool. Let's go. All right. So we're in a completely different space, Julian. Tell us what it is that you're going to share with us right now.
Yeah, I have magically teleported to our other collections room. The first room I was in is where we keep most of our larger objects, sort of like big 3D objects. We even have entire baby carriages and furniture over there. This room is a little bit smaller. And it's where we tend to keep things like costumes, textiles. We have a fantastic costume and textiles collection here at the museum. It's actually one of our strengths. But things also like our books and paper and our archive. And as I referred to earlier, in our archive, it's not a huge one, and it's mostly based on the Chisholm family papers. In our archive, we have these sort of glimpses into the history of Ontario becoming part of Canada, which I think is pretty cool. So if I go back in time, I can just kind of bring you around and show you a few of the things that we actually hold here. So we have, for example, the map, sort of the first map of the town of Oakville that William Chisholm had produced. And you can see parts of it are still really very recognizable.
Mm-hmm.
We have, if I come down over here, this is what a bank mortgage looked like in, I believe this is 1838. No, 39. I was wrong. Sorry. I had to read it. I cheated there and I read it while I was looking at it.
Well, it's still in good condition. The fact that
it is in amazing condition, and we have it sort of kept in this. We've matted it here and acid-free paper to keep it in good condition. I'm scared to breathe on it. And this is a mortgage for £1,000 for where William Chisholm was buying a chunk of land for himself, essentially, within the town of Oakville. And you can see I've got my museum gloves there in case I wanted to actually touch it. Most of the papers that I'll show you are encapsulated in mylar, which makes it a little easier for us to touch them because they are quite delicate, and so that covering actually helps to keep them intact. So we have everything here from business papers to militia announcements to agreements to ledgers. Somewhere in here, I have documentation declaring William Chisholm to be the postmaster here of Oakville. After the rebellion of 1837, there was a lot of tension and angst around that, and they actually decided to kind of reform Canada as the province of Canada in 1841, and that became Canada West and Canada East, Canada West being Ontario. And that's what it was called until Confederation in 1867, when Ontario joined the other provinces. And that's really what we look to in terms of the, we look at 1867 as the kind of the formation date for the Dominion of Canada. And if you look here, we have actually documents that date back to those time periods. In particular, there's some interesting documentation over here around that 1837, 1838 time period. So if you look here, this is a call to muster for the militia. And it was issued on November 20th, 1838 by Colonel George Chisholm, who was one of William Chisholm's sons. George K. Chisholm was actually also the first mayor of Oakville, which was incorporated in 1857. So Oakville's a good 10 years older than the Dominion of Canada. But back in 1838, Chisholm's job was to get the militia together and to get them in shape. Remember, they were still really nervous about what had happened during the Upper Canada Rebellion. And so in 1838, they were pretty anxious to make sure that the militia, which was kind of like the army, it was the army really, but the Army Reserve, if you like, was getting together and doing what they were supposed to do. So back in 1838, if you were an able-bodied man, you were required, I think, between the ages of either 16 or 18 and 65, something like that. There was an age range, pretty broad, where you would have to register in the militia, and you'd actually have to show up at least once per year and learn some drill and fire your musket and do all that kind of stuff. So this notice is basically saying, I need all you guys to come out and sign up. It's going to be on this day in December, and if you don't show up on that day, you're going to be in big trouble. So underneath the militia call, we actually have another document on George Chisholm, and it's quite faded and hard to read, but this is his commission as the Sergeant of Arms in the legislature, which was, a very prestigious position. So there's lots of these great connections between kind of Oakville and the development of Ontario as a province. One of the things that's really cool that you can do from home, and Nabil, I'm going to get you to do it, is you can visit these objects actually online. The museum has a virtual portal, if you like, where we're starting to make our digital collections available. So if you go to collections.oakville.ca, you can see some of these things. And there's actually right now three major groups in that portal. We have the Oakville's Museum collections, which is mostly our 3D material, but you can see some of this archival material. We have the Oakville Trafalgar Archive, which is held by the Clerks Department. And then we also have a corporate art collection. So I think what we're looking at here is, Nabil, you went in here and you Googled or you searched for Centennial. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, so if you're in the Trafalgar Archive part of it, or if you just browse the collections and hit search, you can just pick a keyword and search. And if you search on Centennial, most of the things you'll find are these like cool, and some of them are crazy, black and white photography of of Oakville's celebration in 1957 of its being in existence for 100 years. And you can see that some of these there's all these really staged shots, which are fun. There's pictures of the parade. There was a banquet. There's a picture in here I really love about there's these two kids selling wooden nickels that are commemorative for the event. We have these shots where it's like people in semi-improbable Victorian costume, like in a carriage being pulled in a parade. But they're kind of a lot of fun. Maybe, Nabil, you could find the one of Miss Oakville with the cake.
Yes.
So there was literally a Miss Oakville contest when she's wearing a crown at a jaunty angle and a giant cake. So things that were considered appropriate in 1957 that we wouldn't consider appropriate today. But it is kind of, if you remember that historic lens, it is kind of interesting to go back and look at some of these things.
Totally. What else can they find in the online collections? Anything of interest that we should search and share with our
yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff in here. It's interesting. If you go to the 1967 material, most of that is actually around the opening of the Centennial Square and the Performing Arts Center and the library, which is kind of fun. You've got the lieutenant governor and the mayor and lots of planting of oak trees. And I kind of like that connection because I believe that we're planning to plant some oak trees and give away some trees this year.
Yeah, 153 trees is what we're going to be planting in obviously recognition of Canada being 153 years old this year. So in 1967, this was also something that was happening. So the continuity is there, super exciting. This is the
Yeah, I
same.
literally have, I was looking at these the other day and I was thinking, I wonder if those trees are still around. I wonder if I can find some of those trees. So that's going to be my own like little side
Right.
project to try to
Yes.
find some of the 1867 trees and see if they're still around. I bet some of them still are.
Well, maybe that's something the viewers watching right now can also look up and see if they can
That
find
would be
a tree
awesome.
from
Like if
19.
someone can find one, like go ahead and like Facebook us at the museum or send them to me again, julian.kingston@oakville.ca. I'd love to, if someone could figure that out, that'd be really cool. I'd love to see some modern pictures of a tree that was planted in 1967. Like I said, 1967 was a very good year, if I do say so myself.
Well, there's a Chisholm oak tree outside of Centennial Center at with James W. Snow right here. So maybe we can see if this is still around today.
Yeah, I wonder. I was like trying to imagine that spot in my, like I know the spot they're planting that tree, and I'm just trying to picture if there's a spot. I'm literally going to go by there later today and see if it's there.
There we
So
go.
yeah, I thought I would leave people with that. I mean, they can go online, they can come to these things, they can come to our the museum site at oakville.ca/museum. There's lots of information there. We're on Facebook at Oakville Museum. This site, collections.oakville.ca, is absolutely a work in progress. We have a ton more. Like I said, we have just a fraction of our material up on this site, and we're working towards digitizing more material and making as much of that as available as we can. And yeah, so I think if people want to explore through that, if they have other ideas around how we should celebrate Canada Day or how we sort of look at that centennial theme, yeah, I'd love to have those discussions.
Fantastic. Well, Julian, thank you so much. This was so informative. It's great to know about the history of Oakville as we celebrate the history of Canada and sort of celebrate virtually with everybody else that's watching today. So, Julian, any last words before we wrap it up?
No, just thanks for this, Nabil. It was great chatting with you as always. And I'll just bring me back. Yeah, happy Canada Day, everyone. I hope everybody gets out there and celebrates safely in their own way. And I'd love to see you when we're able to reopen. I'd love to see you at the museum. Until then, please come visit us virtually.
Awesome. Happy Canada Day, everybody. Take care.